One election in Mississippi just sent a message that's a lot bigger than one state Senate seat. At first glance, it looked like a local political story, a special election, a newly drawn district, a candidate wins. End of story. Except that's not what happened, because behind that election is a fight that has been building for decades, involving the Voting Rights Act, the Supreme Court, redistricting battles, and a political question that is suddenly becoming impossible to ignore: who gets represented and who gets to decide. That's where things get interesting. In a newly created majority-black Senate district in Mississippi, Democrat Teresa Gillespie Isom won decisively, capturing roughly 63% of the vote. Her victory was historic. She became the first African-American senator and the first woman to represent that area in the state Senate. For supporters, the result was proof that representation changes when voters are given a meaningful opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. For critics, it was another example of courts stepping into a process they believe should be handled by legislatures, and that disagreement is exactly why this story matters. Because this election didn't happen by accident. The district itself only existed because of court-ordered redistricting. That single detail changes everything. Most people never realize this, but some of the biggest political fights in America are not about campaign ads, debates, or even elections themselves. They're about maps, the lines that determine which neighborhoods vote together, the lines that determine which communities have political influence, the lines that often decide elections long before voters ever show up at the polls. And for decades, one of the most important tools used to challenge unfair district maps came from the Voting Rights Act. To understand why the current debate is so intense, it helps to take a quick step back. Back in the 1960s, the Voting Rights Act was designed to combat widespread discrimination against black voters, particularly in southern states. The law became one of the most significant civil rights achievements in American history. But what many people forget is that the law evolved. In 1982, Congress strengthened it by creating what became known as the effects test. Here's why that matters. Before that change, proving discrimination often required proving intent. And intent is notoriously difficult to prove. A politician rarely stands at a podium and openly announces discriminatory motives. Instead, policies could be written in ways that appeared neutral on paper, while still producing outcomes that disadvantaged certain communities. The effects test allowed courts to focus on results. If a voting practice consistently weakened the political power of minority voters, it could potentially be challenged even without direct evidence of discriminatory intent. Supporters argued this approach recognized how modern discrimination often works. Critics argued it gave courts too much power to reshape political systems. That disagreement has existed for more than 40 years, and now it's back at the center of American politics. The surprising part is that some of the people involved in these debates today were involved in them decades ago. One name that frequently comes up in discussions about voting rights is Chief Justice John Roberts. Long before he became Chief Justice of the United States, Roberts worked in the Reagan administration and expressed skepticism toward aspects of the 1982 voting rights changes. That history has led many commentators to view recent Supreme Court decisions through a much broader lens. Supporters of the court argue the Constitution requires limits on how voting rights laws are interpreted. Critics argue the court has steadily weakened protections that minority voters relied upon for decades. And this is where people start arguing, not just lawyers, not just politicians, ordinary voters. Because what looks like a legal debate inside Washington has real consequences on the ground. If courts make it harder to challenge district maps, then state legislatures gain more freedom when drawing those maps. If legislatures gain more freedom, political power can shift dramatically. That's why elections like the one in Mississippi attract national attention. People on both sides understand the stakes. Republicans in Mississippi were quick to downplay the broader significance of the election. Democrats celebrated it as evidence that court-ordered redistricting had produced a more representative outcome. Both sides saw the same result. They simply interpreted it differently. And that's been the pattern across the country. Because Mississippi is not the only state where these battles are unfolding, similar fights are happening in multiple southern states. Legal challenges, map disputes, court rulings, appeals, new districts, redrawn boundaries. What appears to be technical legal language is actually shaping the future political map of America. Here's the part most people misunderstand. Redistricting is not only about Congress. It affects state legislatures, local governments, county commissions, school boards, judicial elections. The effects can reach every level of government. That's why voting rights advocates see these cases as much bigger than individual elections. They're looking at the long-term consequences, and so are their opponents. Now, here's the twist. While these legal battles continue, another political story is unfolding at the same time. A growing debate over whether America's political map is shifting again. One place where analysts are watching closely is Ohio. For years, Ohio was considered one of the most important swing states in America. If you wanted to know who might win the presidency, you watched Ohio. Then things changed. Donald Trump transformed the political landscape there. His message connected strongly with working-class voters, particularly in manufacturing communities that felt ignored by both parties. Counties that had voted Democratic for generations suddenly moved Republican. The shift was dramatic, and for a while, it seemed permanent. But politics has a way of surprising people. As the next election cycle approaches, some Democrats believe Ohio may be more competitive than many expected. That doesn't mean Ohio suddenly becomes a blue state. Far from it. But it does mean some voters appear willing to reconsider old assumptions. Why? That's where the situation gets messy. Because economic frustration is beginning to collide with political expectations. Many voters supported candidates who promised economic revival, manufacturing growth, more jobs, higher wages, stronger local economies. When people evaluate those promises, they often do so through a very simple lens. What does life actually feel like? Can they afford groceries? Can they afford housing? Are wages keeping up with expenses? Do they believe things are improving? Those questions matter more than political slogans, and according to many analysts, they may become central issues in upcoming elections. Some former supporters of Donald Trump have publicly expressed disappointment over economic outcomes they expected, but haven't fully seen. Others remain firmly supportive and argue broader economic changes take time. That division is creating uncertainty, not just in Ohio, across multiple states. In my view, this is one reason the political environment feels unusually volatile right now. Neither party appears completely comfortable. Republicans continue to benefit from strong support in many regions. Democrats continue to see opportunities in places that looked out of reach only a few years ago, and voters seem increasingly willing to switch sides when they believe promises are not being delivered. That creates a political landscape where small changes can have big consequences. Which brings us back to voting rights, because representation and voter persuasion are ultimately connected. A political party can try to win more voters. It can try to improve turnout. It can try to build broader coalitions. Or it can focus on the rules that shape elections themselves. Critics of recent legal changes argue the weakening of voting rights protections makes those structural battles even more important. Supporters argue states should have greater authority to manage their own election systems. Again, both sides are looking at the same issue and reaching very different conclusions. What nobody seems to dispute is that the stakes are enormous. The maps being drawn today could influence elections for years. The legal precedents being established today could affect future generations. And the political consequences may not become fully visible until several election cycles from now. That's why a state Senate race in Mississippi ended up attracting attention far beyond Mississippi. It wasn't really about one seat. It was about what that seat represents. A debate over representation, a debate over political power, a debate over who gets heard. And judging by the reactions across the country, that debate is only getting started. The Mississippi election offered a glimpse of what may be coming next. More court battles, more redistricting fights, more arguments over voting rights, more questions about the future direction of American politics. Whether you view those developments as progress, concern, or something in between, probably depends on your perspective. But one thing seems clear. The conversation is no longer confined to courtrooms and legal journals. It has moved directly into elections, communities, and everyday political life.